Okay, this is the third part of my lecture series on groups and organizations. This is kind of the plan for today, right here. All right, I want to first do a review of groups, review the groups that can cause problems, do a quick review of the power elite. We've discussed them in the second lecture, right? Then we're going to introduce Neocon Bureaucrats, all right? This is a list of wars the United States have started or manipulated the U.S. population into joining. All right, part of what the power elite have done. All right, so groups. All right, we talked about the basic characteristics of a group. We talked about the difference between in-group versus out-group and how that leads to biases. All right, and how biases are natural. The self-serving biases, which can be both natural and extreme and based on nothing. We talked about classic sociological definitions of groups, primary versus secondary, reference, social categories, bureaucracies. That's going to be covered today in part. We're going to talk about bureaucrats and how bureaucracies and bureaucrats can be a threat to democracy. Largely because they're not elected officials who have great influence and power. All right, then we talked about reasons why people form groups, and I believe this was a very comprehensive list. I'm not going to review it all right? And then we talked about 6 groups that can cause problems for democracy. I say that can undermine democracy in the USA. The power elite, which we covered in the last lecture. Neocon bureaucrats, which we'll begin covering today, neocon non-government organizations, private military security contractors, private intelligence corporations, and then multinational corporations. Okay. So we talked about a power elite, and we talked about a power club, the Bonesmen from Yale University. Power elite go way back to old money power families, originally in New England. But I say here World War I was a key turning point. And here is a diagram of the power elite. All the people highlighted in gray were bonesmen. All right, and these guys are all tightly knit. Childhood friends, growing up together, going to the same prep schools, going to the same university, Yale, and joining the same clubs. All right, they intermarry each other. They have the same banks, partners in the same bank. All these guys are partners in Brown Brothers Harriman, W.A. Harriman, same corporations, investments. They get key positions of power, right? Where they can have major influence on policy, like starting wars, involved in all these wars. All right, I can't teach it all again how they started these wars. They also profit off these wars directly through their corporations, like Halliburton, KBR. And I showed you how these go back to Halliburton and KBR are together. KBR is a subsidiary of Halliburton. Both are owned by Dresser Industries, which is owned by W.A. Harriman Banking. All right. So I'm showing that basically, a lot of wealth can be acquired from warfare. All right. Warfare has had a huge impact upon our economy, especially in the 20th century, for industrial production of weapons. Now, to give you an example of how wars can be profitable, I want to review the summary of my section on exchange theory and U.S. actions in the Middle East to create conflict. All right. So first of all, we'll take a look at overall spending for defense. All right. And compared to other nations, U.S. is way above everyone else. We spend more in defense than all the rest of these top 10 nations combined. Top 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Well, the rest of the 9 combined. All right. second to us, in a distant second, is China, then Great Britain, then Japan, Saudi Arabia. Russia is behind Saudi Arabia. Germany, India, France, Brazil. All right. So by far, the U.S. spends far more in weapons than anyone else. All right. And what's funny is we worry about the major, scary Russian threat, when they're way down here. All right. So what I want to do is show how conflict and war or threat in the Middle East, in oil-producing nations or regions, can be profitable. Right. So did we start wars in the Middle East? Did we start conflict? Well, I can't go back and teach all of that again. If you don't remember, then it's like, as far as you know, it doesn't happen, but I can't teach it again, right? But there's a long history of U.S. creating conflict in the Middle East and wars, including the recent war, our invasion of Iraq. That was totally manufactured. I can't teach how that was done again, but, all the masses fell for it. All right, so if you create a war in oil-producing nations, in all wars, there's rapid consumption of weapons. Right? Wars are maximum efforts. It's fight or die, right? So you have rapid consumption of weapons. Now, all of these oil-producing nations do not have their own defense industries. They don't have the sophisticated technology and industries to manufacture these super highly sophisticated weapons. The most complex things in the world. Right? So they purchase them. They purchase them from primarily Western nations, but also Russia or China or anyone else. Mostly from the West. We're the biggest sellers of weapons. Western nations. The U.S. is the biggest seller of weapons in the world. All right. So you have rapid consumption of weapons. Now, if there's rapid consumption of weapons, you have to have large weapons purchases. Right, for these Middle East countries, oil-producing countries, right? How do they purchase things? Well, they purchase it with either taking loans, they go into debt, or they sell oil. Right? Either way, that's profitable. If you have to take out a loan, the banks are going to make big money on servicing the loan. If you have to sell oil, well, that can benefit Western corporations and the economy as a whole. Right? If you got to sell more oil, right? I've shown you historically what happens, right? When there's war in these areas, they have to sell more oil, or they use oil as a weapon, and they overproduce to wage economic warfare. For example, the Saudis and Kuwaitis and United Arab Emirates overproducing to wage war to help Iraq wage a war against Iran. All right. So you produce more oil. More oil's on the market. That causes oil prices to fall. Now, the big oil companies, for example, the big Western oil companies, today are not the major, producers of oil throughout the world necessarily. All right. Since the 1950s through 1980, there's been nationalization of oil in foreign nations. So the major oil companies used to be what's called the Seven Sisters. 7 major oil companies like Shell, I forget what it was, Standard, Texaco, and I forget the Seven Sisters. But they lost direct control of production, so they had to move to more downstream operations. So because of that, low oil prices benefit them. It decreases their input costs. Also, falling oil prices has the effect of boosting the world economy, decreasing input costs across the board, a hedge against inflation, and it also busts OPEC. I explained that how overproduction due to a war can bust OPEC, and it did. I can't teach that again, unfortunately. All right, so if you have large weapons purchases, there's a lot of profits from the weapon sales themselves. The armaments industry is highly profitable because largely it is a restricted industry, a restricted commodity, and that reduces competition, that allows for increased greater control of price to increase profits, and just looking at some of the cost of these, they're high value items that are consumed at a rapid rate. Um, for example, this is a 155 millimeter cannon round, artillery round, right? About 6 inches in diameter. It cost $250,000, over $250,000, $268,000 per round. Every one of these fired off. It's only 6 inches wide and maybe about, I don't know, 2.5 feet, 3 feet long, right? It cost $250,000, and you're firing these like crazy. And the next thing is the consumption rate is rapid during war. All right. For example, you buy a Cadillac. That Cadillac, the first owner may have it for about 4 or 5 years and sell it, right? Then it's resold. That Cadillac could be in the market out there for a good 15 years or more even, right? But weapons are consumed rapidly. As soon as they're fired and they explode, it's consumption. Another example is a home. You buy a home, that home, brand new home, that home could be on the market for a good 100 years, right? Not so with weapons. There's rapid consumption rate during war. It's also a restricted commodity. It's not like you can buy it off the shelf at Walmart, all right? Here's a nuclear weapon. You're not going to go buy this off the shelf at Walmart. And what that does is that restricts competition. Restricted competition allows for greater control of price, right? Which is monopoly power. You can jack up price. Also, without competition, you have a lot more inefficiencies, increasing costs and price. Okay, so other examples of how pricey weapons are. This is an F-16 fighter plane made by the United States. I'm not sure who makes this now. I think actually Lockheed makes this now, but it used to be General Dynamics who first made this. All right, and each plane here we sold a bunch of these planes to Iraq, and we sold them at 167 million per plane, right? Whereas we purchased these for 14.6 million per plane in 1998, right? So price has gone way up, but to be fair, this price includes a total package for not just the plane, but also training and maintenance support. All right. Here's a AH-64 Apache helicopter. It goes for 35 million per helicopter. So these are very pricey, right? A lot of profit made here. Rapid consumption rates during war. High per unit volume. High per unit price for each of these. All right. So again, this causes huge corporate profits. Okay, let's see where we're at here. All right, now when there's war in like the Middle East between oil-producing nations, not all nations are at war, and even though a nation may not be at war, well, the war itself can destabilize the region, create greater threat, right? This could create a greater sense of need for security, and so even though nations are not directly involved in the war or involved at all in the war, well, they may feel a need to increase their military resources, purchase weapons, aircraft, tanks, whatever. So you can have large weapons purchases as well, right? And they have to sell oil. All right, 6, 7. So whenever you have a war, you have a great amount of destruction in the countries where the war is being waged. And whenever you have a great amount of destruction, you have to have a great amount of reconstruction, and a lot of money can be made there. One example is the first Gulf War and how Kuwait was ravaged. It was almost razed, all right, including their oil industry, and to rebuild it all, right, that would require a lot of reconstructions. And during the war, I was reading the papers back then, And I went back and reread all these articles on, uh, the hopes of American companies. Hundreds and hundreds of American companies hope to make big bonanza contracts to reconstruct Kuwait. However, only three companies monopolized all these contracts. It was Halliburton, KBR, and Bechtel. All right, everyone else was locked out. No calls returned for any of the other companies. So these companies made huge profits on reconstruction. And what is Halliburton? Well, that goes back to Bush. What is KBR? Well, that's part of Halliburton, right? What is Bechtel? Bechtel was the favored Neocon corporation during the Reagan administration. All right, 7, 8. All right, so here are private ways of making profit off of war. Okay. We talked about reconstruction a little bit and how only a few companies monopolize all the contracts. Well, a lot of those same companies monopolize these contracts as well. So the first area I want to talk about is called LOGCAP. This is Logistics Civilian Augmentation Program. And what it is it's private corporations providing all sorts of support for the military that used to be performed by the military. For example, Supply Corps in the Army. Take, for example, World War II. You had Patton's Third Army racing across Europe towards Germany, right? You had what's called the Red Ball Express coming out of Antwerp with truckloads with fuel, ammunition, food, everything that these soldiers need, right? Just trains of these trucks coming to support the advancing armored forces of Patton's Army, all right? All provided by the Army itself, the Army Supply Corps. Well, today all this stuff is performed by private corporations, whether it's transporting troops, whether it's building bases, building hospitals, supplying fuel, supplying food, transporting munitions, on and on and on, providing laundry services, providing fresh water. They get contracts for all this stuff, and they do a botch job. I'll talk about that in just a second here. And they make huge money. It's like unholy money they make off these wars. No bid contracts, which is totally against American spirit of competition and free enterprise. No bid contracts. Favored companies get it without having to bid. They get cost plus contracts, which means how much you spend, you get that return and plus a percentage over that, say 20% over that. So it's in your interest to be wasteful, to be profligate, right? To spend as much as you can, and you get more money on top of that. Okay. So no bid contract, zero competition, you get cost plus contracts. Now, the first war, which was a big logistics civilian augmentation program war, was the first Gulf War. All right, where they provided everything, food, MREs, and they made massive amounts of money off of it. For example, one example is just transporting troops. All right. They got a contract to get $10,000 per troop one way. All right. Now this is back in the day when, 1991, back when, let's say, a round trip ticket from United States to Israel may cost $1,000 both ways, right? This is one way transporting one soldier in a plane packed wall to wall. All right, 10,000. Right, for one way. Yeah. All right. Okay. Now, the second Gulf War, the invasion of Iraq War, became the first big war for private military security contractors. Right. Private military security contractors are basically private armies. They're private mercenaries who have proven records of very poor performance, uh, um, high cost, wasteful. Uh, they have to be rescued often by the U.S. military, um, but they make great money for these corporations. All right. Other examples of private military security corporations are KBR, Blackwater. All right. Now, here's some examples of fraud by Halliburton. All right. One example is Halliburton's paid per truck load that's sent. All right. So one thing that they were doing, one practice that Halliburton was conducting, owned by the Bush family, going back to the Bush family, was sending trucks that were empty in convoys. Right. So they have a bunch of trucks being sent, but they throw in their empty trucks because they get paid per truck. All right. So they're just milking. They're bilking the government. They're bilking the taxpayer. And at the same time, these trucks are going through a combat zone, all right, where there's IEDs. So you have civilian truck drivers, right, putting their lives on the line, right, not to get essential equipment and munitions to the troops so they can survive, but with empty trucks, just so that the corporation can make money. All right. They overcharge things. For example, a 6-pack of Coke costs $45. Now you might think, well, it costs a lot of money to ship the Coke from United States. No, this is Coca-Cola that's made in factories right there in Saudi Arabia, right in the region, right? And they're charging $99 to do a bag full of laundry. Here's some more examples of waste, right? They bought an excessive amount of SUVs for the personnel in Halliburton out there. And when they didn't need these SUVs, most of them stayed right there in the compounds, right? Where are you going to go? So they bought all these SUVs, and they didn't provide any oil filters or oil. So, after it gets 3, 4, 5,000 miles, maybe 6,000 miles, the engine starts having problems, and the engine breaks down. What did they do? Did they replace the engine? Did they get oil? They didn't get oil filters. Did they replace the engine? No. You burned the whole damn SUV. They would burn it down, right? And then buy new ones. And then they get paid for the new ones. Same thing happened with any type of equipment they needed. One example is computers. They purchased a huge amount of computers, right? And then they said, well, these are not the right computers. So did they return them? No. They burned them. Brand new computers, burned in a ditch, right? Then they bought new ones. And they made profit off of buying new ones. That's a pretty plush deal there. Cost plus contracts. All right. Now, during the Iraq invasion war, over 50% of U.S. personnel were private contractors. By 2012, with the pullout of U.S. troops, all those troops were replaced by all the forces there were now private military security contractors. Right, we still have a lot of those over there. All right, so later on in a later lesson, I'm going to talk about these mercenary forces and how they're problematic, how they create problems, atrocities and illegal killings, and also ineffective combat effectiveness. Okay. So weapons purchases help with the balance of trade, right? Help recycle currency back to the U.S. Help sustain trade, and also helps maintain sufficient currency in the U.S. to maintain low interest rates. Another benefit of war in the Middle East is flipping client states. One example is Iraq. Iraq used to be a client state of the Soviet Union and then of Russia. The primary source of the weapons were Soviet and then Russian, although they did purchase some French stuff. For example, I know they purchased the F-1 Mirage fighter planes. but mostly was Russians. Now, who is who who is the Iraq a client of? The U.S. We sell them weapons. So all these weapons, F-16s, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. Everything, all their weapons are now U.S. From M1 Abrams tanks to any truck to artillery, the 155 millimeter artillery batteries, and to the mobile 155 millimeter artillery batteries, to Humvees, to small arms, right? And if you remember when ISIS first raged in across Syria, then into Iraq, right? What weapons uh, were ISIS fighting with? All U.S. weapons seized from um, Iraqi weapons depots, right? So it was ex-Iraqi military who were familiar with those weapons depots, right? Who joined ISIS, who went in and seized those weapons. So we're fighting ISIS who are using our weapons. All right. So to pay for weapons and to pay for reconstruction, these countries have to take out loans, right? Then you make a lot of money off of servicing those loans. So weapons reconstruction, oil nation has debt, right? Bank loans, they make big profits. All right. Now another thing that is a benefit of war, in this case, is elimination of threat to the petrodollar. For example, in October, November of 2000, Saddam Hussein went off the petrodollar onto the euro. All right. When we invaded Iraq, like immediately we put them back on the petrodollar. So it restored the petrodollar, and now it's not just protecting the petrodollar in Iraq; it's protecting the petrodollar throughout the world. All right, it's enforcing discipline. If people feel that they go off the petrodollar, there's a chance they may be invaded by the United States. Well, they're not going to do it. All right, so I want to explain more of why the petrodollar is significant. All right, so here's a quick bit of economics. All right, when you have big spending, right? For example, the war or the bank bailout from the 2007 crash and the stimulus package thereafter, right? All this required big deficit spending, spending more than we're taking in through taxes, right? So you have deficit spending. Now, how do you respond to that? Do you raise taxes? No, you don't raise taxes. That's not politically feasible, right? You want to get reelected. It's not good for the economy too. Um, so you finance it with debt, right? You finance it with borrowing. Now, how does the government create debt? Well, the U.S. Treasury sells bonds. What are bonds? Bonds are promissory notes, right? Now, these bonds are an asset, and when you print more bonds, the supply goes up and the value goes down. Bonds have a coupon return rate. For example, a $200 bond here. Let's say you purchase it for $100 or something like that. At 10 years, it's worth 200 or something like that. All right. Now these are bought and sold on the market, so their value is subject to supply and demand. Yet the return rate, the coupon rate, is constant. So if you print more bonds, you saturate the market with bonds, increasing the supply. That drives down the price of these bonds. Right? Now, given the fact that the return on these bonds are constant, that means the yield rate actually goes up. All right? So that drives up the yield rate. So more bonds drives up their yield rate. It's these big banks, financial institutions, maybe like central banks, or they purchase these with dollars. Right? Now, this can raise the increase in yields, pressures up interest rates. Right? Now, rising interest rates are not good for the economy. It can slow the economy, as is readily evident lately with the Fed last year in 2018 raising interest rates 3 times. How that's having kind of an impact on slowing the economy, increasing a threat of recession. Um, so the Fed, if there's rising interest rates, can respond to this by lowering interest rates. And the Fed has 3 tools to control interest rates. One is a discount rate, which is the rate at which they lend money to member banks. They can lower that. Another is a reserve requirement. They can relax that. They tend not to do this. They want to maintain about 10% reserves, cash on hand in the bank, right? What's most often done by the Fed is open market operations, where they buy and sell assets. They could be treasury bonds or mortgage-backed securities or these government-sponsored enterprise securities. Things like Freddie Mae, Freddie Mac, TVA. The old Tennessee Valley Authority, right? Are examples. So if they purchase these, what they do is when the Fed purchases these, the Fed gets to make money, right? They make money out of the air, so to speak, and they make deposits, credits in for those banks in the Federal Reserve Bank. All right. Now, when you make money, there's huge profits to be made, and those, for example, it's called seigniorage. If this is a $100 bill, and let's say it costs 50 cents to make this $100 bill, well, the profit margin is then $99.50, right? Whoever gets to make this money goes in their pocket. Now, it's a Fed Reserve Bank that gets to make the money. The Federal Reserve Bank is not a government bank. It's not owned by the U.S. government. It's a private bank. So a private bank makes a big chunk of money by making money. However, according to the Federal Reserve Act of, 1911 or something, I think, according to that, the Federal Reserve is limited to 6% profits, although, yeah, so they're limited to 6% profits, but 6% on making a nation's, money supply is huge. So they get to make money, and that's called monetizing the debt, right? So to pay for the debt, pay for deficit spending, pay for the debt, you print bonds, right? But then you go around and you purchase those bonds and you pump out money. It's called monetizing the debt, increasing the money supply. So if you increase the money supply, just like these bonds, that has a risk of decreasing money value. All right? When you have decreasing money value, that's called inflation, because if the value of your currency is going down, that means the amount of money you got to pay for each good is going up, which means prices are going up, and that's inflation, the rise of prices. Right? Well, inflation's bad for your economy. So that's not good as well. Rising interest rates are not good for your economy, but inflation's bad for your economy. So that makes it important to have increased demand for a dollar, or large demand for dollars. If there's large demand for dollars, that helps maintain dollar value. That's a hedge against inflation. And that's why the petrodollar is so important, because there's a huge volume of oil that is bought and sold every day. And the petrodollar is basically all OPEC nations are required to sell oil in exchange for dollars. Now, I think there's 2 nations that don't do that. There's only 2. I think Venezuela and Iran. They checked out of that thing, right? But that's it. All the other OPEC nations are in it. And still today, even in other countries, the dollar is the biggest currency for purchasing oil. That helps maintain dollar demand. And an interesting fact is there's like 60% of dollars are not in the United States, they're overseas. So a big part of maintaining dollar demand, dollar value, is overseas use. All right, now this is a whole bunch of stuff, and to understand all this, to really appreciate it, you have to understand my whole lesson on exchange theory. And, I know people are not going to have that, so I know that a simple attack in social reality can just oh, it's all crazy. And a lot of people are not going to understand what it is I just taught here. So what dominates is a simple attack in social reality. Um, so let's do a quick summary of the economic benefits of war. Right, you had big profits from the military industry itself, right, and this became big in the 20th century. Across the board, not just weapons, right? When you have war, there's high consumption of everything. Food goes way up, leather goods go way up, cotton goes way up. Of course, steel goes way up. Big profits from no-bid contracts. No-bid contracts, cost-plus contracts. All right. You bust OPEC. I can't teach how OPEC was busted again, but it was due to the first Gulf War, largely due to the heavy debt of Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. And you regain control of oil price, right, which is something that the U.S. lost in 1971. So the idea is this, all right? I can't go back and teach all this again. I'm just going to talk through it. I don't know if it'll be understood. But in 1971, the Texas Railroad Commission set pro-rationing at 100% capacity. That means that we had no spare production capacity. We're producing as much oil as we can just to try to meet demand, and demand is rising. So demand is exceeding our production capacity, which meant we became net importers of oil, right? Now, if you have spare production capacity, you can raise production or decrease production to control price, right? So if you have spare capacity and you raise production, then you lower price. If you lower production, then you raise price, right? But once we attain 100% pro-rationing, well, we can no longer control price because we're just pumping out as much as we can, just trying to maintain, and we're not maintaining, right? So we have to import. Now what that means is the control of price shifted over to whoever had spare production capacity, and that was OPEC, especially Saudi Arabia, who had monster spare production capacity, right? And then that resulted later in the killing of our economy, 1973 with the Arab oil embargo, and then in 79 with the Iran revolution, right? Oil prices went up 12-fold and had a devastating effect upon our economy, right? So through this war, by busting OPEC, we can regain indirect control of price through creating conflict. All right. Now I know people are going to be like, "Oh, unbelievable!" All right. You have to see it again, and I can't teach it again. Okay, low oil prices, increased corporate profits. It also is a boost to the world economy, right? Which benefits our economy, of course. You balance trade, right? Recycle currency, and you protect the petrodollar, so you can expand the money supply with less threat of inflation, right? And expanding the money supply, of course, you make a lot of profits. Private companies make big profits off of seigniorage. You know, the Fed is a private bank, right? You also avoid inflation, which is bad for your economy. Big profits from loans to oil exporting nations, right? Okay, so you make big profits off of the loans. Big profits from making money through monetizing the debt. All right, well that's printing money here. All right, so I say here's a summary. Does this look like a racket? And if it does that make the people in charge racketeers, right? Does it also look like a shakedown? And if it is a shakedown, who's being what's being shaken down, right? Well, one is the oil tree. Through this conflict, you're shaking the oil tree, getting more oil out of it, right? But another person who's being shaken down is a U.S. taxpayer, which people may not worry about, so long as their taxes don't go up. If it just increases the debt, right? But who makes money off of the debt? Well, the Federal Reserve Bank. They get to buy the debt. When they purchase these bonds, they own the debt. All right? They get to make money and they get to own the debt. What a deal is that? So is conflict profitable? Right? Is there incentive to promote conflict? And has the U.S. started a lot of wars? All right. Revolutionary War, War of 1812, many Indian wars, many Indian wars, Mexican-American War. Well, Civil War was South started that. It wasn't the Union. Right? The South did that because they were done politically, which means economically. Spanish-American War, U.S. involvement in World War I, U.S. involvement in World War II, both manipulations. Vietnam War, First Gulf War, the Iraq Invasion War. Now I say here a new Cold War. I mean, I see this. How many people see what's going on? Right? I see us manufacturing a new Cold War. All right. The average person the average American probably is like pointing at Russia or China. Right? They're not seeing how this is being maneuvered. We'll talk about this in the next lecture. All right. So I want to go into today's lecture on Neocon Bureaucrats. Right. First of all, recall that Max Weber warned that bureaucracies are a threat to democracy because they're government officials who have very important roles, play very powerful parts, but yet are not elected officials, so they're not accountable to the voting populace. All right, which is a threat to democracy. And these guys populate the executive, State Department, Defense Department, National Security. They're all throughout, agencies. They dominate U.S. foreign policy. They're not elected and have too much power, especially in foreign policy. Okay. And to begin, I want to read a message from FDR. He said before Congress in 1938, he said, "Unhappy events abroad, the rise of fascism, have taught us two simple truths about the liberty of a democratic people. The first truth is that the liberty of a democracy is not safe if the people tolerate growth of private power to the point where it becomes stronger than their democratic state itself. That, in essence, is fascism, ownership of the government by an individual, by a group, or by any other controlling private power." Right? So, does that apply to the Bonesmen? Right? Private group getting way too much power, one small group. All right. Now, I wanted to tell you where the neocons kind of fall into the spectrum. Here's a political spectrum. You have left wing, you have right wing. Way in the far left, you have communists, and then socialists. Then towards the middle, you have pretty close together. You have Democrats, Republicans. Democrats more left, Republicans more right. Way to the far right, you have Nazis, but then just shy of them, you can have these neoconservatives, right? These guys who create a lot of conflict, right? Are very much into expansion of U.S. power overseas and influence, right? Often involving conflict. And what I want to do today is I want to talk about some of the nasty stuff that neocons do, not just starting wars, but torture, conflict creation, and then we're gonna get to a new Cold War tomorrow, right? And starting with how it leads from Ukraine, leading to the new Cold War. But there's more than just Ukraine. I'm gonna try to organize this. All right. So the first thing I want to talk about is an operation called Operation Condor. It was a counterinsurgency operation that was taught by U.S. forces, special forces, for example, in the School of Americas in Fort Benning, Georgia, and also in mobile training teams that went out in country, and they taught very heavy-handed counterinsurgency methods. Much of which were French-based. The French were doing this for a long time to protect their colonial empire, to put down, indigenous revolts. All right, and we used a lot of the same methods. These methods involved kidnap, torture, murder, death squads, and they were used in Latin America. In the late 1970s, President Carter backed away from Operation Condor, but when Reagan came in, well, he pushed it again. It was like the idea, we got to get tough with the commies. We got to, take off the gloves. Can't be soft in the commies, so we got to use harsh methods. Well, they're very harsh. Now, was this fighting communism or was it promoting communism? When you use extreme methods like this, do you pacify people? Or, you can, right? But at the same time, you can radicalize other people. You can make them extremists. You can make them so damn determined. You can piss them off so much that they have no fear, right? And they can become suicide bombers, for example. So, one example of a guy who was in a mobile training team, the guy who commanded the mobile training team in El Salvador in the 1980s, right, was this guy here, Colonel James Steele, right? He was then later handpicked by Donald Rumsfeld, right, to be in charge of the U.S. liaison for the Shia militia in Iraq. And then they started using the same counterinsurgency methods: kidnap, torture, murder, death squads, right? Tortured bodies of Sunni men being thrown out in the street every day. Right. Now, does that help? Does that pacify people? Does that scare them into passivity, or does that radicalize them? Does that increase the ranks by pissing off people around the world? All right, fighting terrorism or creating more terrorists? Yeah, was it fighting terrorism or was it creating more terrorists? So they euphemistically called it, we got to take off the gloves. Now, I know that the masses of America are going to deny this. No, the U.S. doesn't do this stuff. Like the U.S. doesn't start wars where we have mass killing, right? Like the U.S. doesn't conduct torture. And we'll talk about open declarations of torture policies in the Bush administration down here in a second. And I will mention my own torture. I went through torture as a U.S. citizen in our country, having done no wrong, having broken no law. Okay, so another example of neocon stuff is starting the Vietnam War. And the reason why I mention this is because it's right up here. Right? Neocon bureaucrats. They're also power elite. Key guys were George Bundy, William Bundy, Averill Harriman, all bonesmen. That wasn't the only guys. There's more guys involved, but these were key guys. Right? Got us the Vietnam War. Neocon bureaucrats, non-elected. All right, so they're the key people who set up the Gulf of Tonkin incident. Remember, there was a Gulf of Tonkin incident. They got us a Gulf of Tonkin resolution, which was a legal basis for the entire Vietnam War. All right, it was a euphemism for declaration of war. It just said authorizing the president to use military force. And as I showed you in the Spanish-American War, the U.S. population repeatedly falls for this. The U.S. Congress repeatedly falls for the same trick. History repeats itself. All right. They're all skull and bones men, not elected, all bureaucrats. So I mentioned here that one of the programs that was in the Vietnam War was the Phoenix Project. It was an assassination program meant to knock off key, Viet Cong figures. All right. Unfortunately, what happened to this program, it was meant to be efficient, but then it degraded to a large extent and was misused by the local people, for example, which is a natural outcome. It's the same thing that happened in Iraq. The same exact dynamic was created. Now, once the Phoenix program got started and they're assassinating people, people become aware of this, and what they were smart enough to then use the American assassins to knock off their enemies, right? So they would rat out their enemy. It could be a longtime enemy, it could be an economic enemy, a business, a competition or whatever, and they would rat them out as being a communist, whether they were or not. And then they'd be targeted by the U.S. and knocked off. And then what happens after that is, right, people, begin to learn that the Americans are being used to knock off people this way. So then there's a fear that it may be used against you, right? So you do it to your enemy before he does it to you. And then the same exact dynamic happened in Iraq, where people were ratting out their enemies as being, terrorists or, Al Qaeda, whatever, so that they're arrested by American military forces and then thrown into detention centers where they're abused and humiliated and then tortured. All right. So same situation happened. Same type of thing happened again. Iraq invasion war bait and switch. All right. So this was conducted by the neocons, right? They used 9/11 to get the Iraq invasion war. All right. I can't teach you all this again, all the details of it. What I have here, I have a video. General Wesley Clark, I guess I'll show this to you. He's talking about how the neocons basically hijacked the U.S. policy and got us into the war. Well, I mean, that's obvious, right? And not more than that, I taught you exactly how they did it. How they used the one-year anniversary. How they had a plan. They called it a meticulously planned strategy. Why is this not showing up here? There it is.
I sat on this information. I said to Paul, I said to the troops in Desert Storm. And he said,
so General Wesley Clark is talking to Paul Wolfowitz, one of the key neocon bureaucrats who got us into the Iraq invasion war. And after the war, he was made the president of the World Bank. And I know that he was pushing hard for this corrupt banker named Chalabi to be the president of Iraq. And Chalabi was a main source of intelligence, who had no expertise in WMD, right? But he was like blah 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 blah. They have all these mobile biological things, right? And instead of having real factual evidence, the Bush administration filed testimony of a known liar. The German intelligence declared that Chalabi was a known fabricator, right? So the Bush administration was just trying to grab for things that supported what they wanted to do. One guy's testimony.
well, yeah, he said, but not really. He said, because the truth is we should have gotten rid of Saddam Hussein, and we didn't. And this was just after the Shia uprising in March of '91, which we had provoked, and then we kept our troops on the sidelines and didn't intervene. He said, but one thing we did learn, he said, we learned that we can use our military in the region, in the Middle East, and the Soviets won't stop us. He said, and we've got about 5 or 10 years to clean up those old Soviet client regimes. Syria, Iran, Iraq, before the next great superpower comes on to challenge us. And it was like, I'm coming out of the Mojave Desert. I've been training troops. I haven't been teaching geostrategy for some time. And suddenly a guy just sort of shoves this nugget at me. Well, you remember? It was a pretty stunning thing. You mean the purpose of the military is to start wars and change governments? It's not to sort of deter conflict. We're going to invade countries, and my mind was spinning. And I put that aside. It was like a nugget that you hold on to. This country was taken over by a group of people with a policy coup. Wolfowitz and Cheney and Rumsfeld and you could name a half dozen other collaborators from the Project for a New American Century.
Project for New American Century is an aggressive, expansionist American program.
Wanted us to destabilize the Middle East, turn it upside down.
We did destabilize the Middle East greatly. We destroyed the balance of power, the traditional balance of power between Iraq and Iran. All right. We created a Shia bloc in the north. We exacerbated the Sunni-Shia conflict in the Middle East, which is now centered between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And of course, we created ISIS through our invasion.
Under our control. It went back to those comments in 1991. Now, did anybody ever tell you that? Was there a national dialogue?
Okay. All right. I think General Wesley Clark, God bless him, but he's rather naive as to what the U.S. has done historically. We've created a lot of wars. We fought a lot of offensive wars, and we have overthrown many governments, usually through covert action. But later on in this lesson, we'll talk about how modern neocon NGOs, which are on the surface pro-democracy NGOs, but are actually used to destabilize and overthrow governments. All right, so what I want to do is I want to review U.S. policies in Iraq and how irrational they were, and how conflict-creating they were, and how they created chaos. So every U.S. policy in Iraq is textbook to create conflict and chaos. Right? First of all, you manufacture a false, bogus war, right? Through a manipulation of the American population, connecting 9/11 to Iraq, right? Then manufacturing all this terror and fear, WMD, which didn't exist, and using that to justify our invasion, right? Of someone who didn't do 9/11. I mean, I've talked to so many people complaining about, our invasion of Iraq, and you know what they all come back and say? Well, yeah, but we had 9/11, and I'm just thinking, how stupid are people? I mean, can't they think this through? All right, so first of all, the U.S. invasion of an oil-rich Muslim nation, especially without good cause, radicalizes Muslims around the world, increases terrorists. Right? This is super anti-strategic. A fundamental strategy is to undermine the morale and motivation of your enemy, not to boost it up, not to get them all fired up and pumped up. Then the next thing we did was de-Baathification. All right? And what that means is anyone who was part of the Baath Party no longer has a position in government. And the thing about it was that if you want a position in government, you pretty much had to be a member of the Baath Party. So you're clearing out the government. You're clearing out big swaths of people whose livelihoods are based upon it. Not just government administrators directly, but anyone who's involved with the government. Whether you're a garbage man driving a garbage truck, whether you're a teacher, whether you're some sort of administrator, whether you're working for the transportation system, all right? So what it does is it destroys incomes, it destroys livelihoods, it creates social upheaval. You take away their well, I don't know, I can't think today. their retirement, their pensions. All right, so now also when you have debathification, you're clearing out a huge portion of your governing expertise. All right, people who run the power system, who run transportation, who run water, all right, everything, all the administrators cleared out. So you're destroying the governing and infrastructure expertise. It causes societal upheaval and chaos. Then you dismantle the army. You totally destroy the army. You're destroying their careers, their livelihoods, their pensions, right? And these guys, of course it's going to piss these guys off. They still have access to their weapons. So they go get their weapons and they start fighting. This was the start of the insurgency, right? In the press, it was all Al Qaeda. Al Qaeda was nothing at the start of the war. All right. Before the war, there was only a small group in northern Iraq, up here, protected by the U.S. UN no-fly zone. All right. A small group that wasn't Al Qaeda but related to Al Qaeda. They're fundamentalist conservatives, and they were hiding out in northern Iraq, protected by the U.S. no-fly zone, right, against Saddam Hussein, who was trying to hunt these guys down. Right. The key insurgency was the ex-Iraqi military. Now, after the war got started, after we invaded Iraq, well, that drew in all sorts of foreign fighters who joined Al Qaeda. Then Al Qaeda blossomed. It was after our invasion. Our invasion of Iraq created Al Qaeda in Iraq. All right. So with the insurgency, the U.S. has to fight against these guys, and it's a brutal urban warfare. Kicking in doors, a lot of destruction, a lot of collateral damage. Cities are destroyed, their economies destroyed, their infrastructure is destroyed, right? And housing's destroyed. We create chaos. It also results in the killing of over 123,000 civilians, all right? Which is a great motivation again for your enemy. The U.S. invasion creates a power vacuum, which creates a sectarian civil war. So this was obvious and expected, predictable, that if you take down the central government, well, you have three main groups in there. They all hate each other: Kurds, Sunnis, and Shia. Kurds are a branch of Sunni, but they're a little bit different, right? And they're gonna go at it against each other, right? And then you had daily Sunni Shia terrorism, suicide vests, right, blowing each other up daily. The U.S. invasion ignites an insurgency. There's nasty urban warfare on U.S. boys, much collateral damage, right? A lot of deaths, radicalized Muslims around the world. Al Qaeda wants a small group in Iraq, swells in its ranks. So they went from a tiny group of about 200 hiding out in northern Iraq to about between 2,000 and 3,000. Right? Still not that big. The biggest factor of the insurgency was ex-Iraqi military. So then what we did is we sanctioned and supported the Shia militia, right? Rumsfeld handpicks Colonel Steele as American liaison, who ran the mobile training team in El Salvador. The Shia militia then starts using U.S. counterinsurgency methods: kidnap, torture, murder, death squads. And the tortured bodies of dead Sunni men were being thrown out into the streets on a daily basis. Their bodies were filled with drill holes, power drills. They would drill holes into these guys as a means of torture. Torture backfires, Does it scare people? Does it pacify people? Right? For some, but for other people, it radicalizes them. It pisses them off, right? It backfired for me. It didn't stop me. For example, when I went through my torture, my body was destroyed. I was broken down bad, right? And when it started, when I was in my mid-40s, I was still in great shape. And my body and my athletic ability was, a source of like pride in a sense, right? It was I hate to say it, but it was a source of pride in a sense of a big part of my sense of like value, right? Once it's destroyed, you you think you care, right? You think you're going to stop me? What do you have that's leverage over me? Um, anyway, so uh, mass detention centers where widespread humiliation, torture are conducted. All right. Uh, all right. So you have these detention centers. You round up all these people. A lot of them are not guilty, right? Uh, so so when you round these guys up, are some terrorists? Yeah, that's a tactical method. Are they insurgents? The vast majority were insurgents. Were some of them innocent? Totally. Yeah. Right? Being ratted out by someone so that they don't rat them out. All right? And now you throw them all together, you humiliate them, you torture them, and what do they form in there? They form ISIS. Throwing together ex-Iraqi military who were hunting down the radicals before with the radical fundamentalists in these detention camps where they are tortured and humiliated, and then the military who had been hunting down the radicals joined forces with the radicals to form ISIS in places like Camp Bucca. Now, in terms of ISIS formation, we gave them one, the cause, the motivation, the breeding ground for the rise of ISIS. It's anti-divide and conquer, anti-strategic. So 6 weeks after 9/11, the neocons had a plan to take down 7 nations in 5 years. You know what? I'm gonna go through the humiliation and torture methods here, right? And you can see how people can get radicalized, right? Some people may be pacified, but a lot of people can be, get severely pissed off from all this. They then looked down Iraq. Okay, I'm gonna move on. I'm gonna move on to all the torture stuff here. So I said a lot of stuff already. Neocon policies create big problems in Iraq, destroy the country, destroy the economy. You had de-Baathification, destroy livelihoods, right? You disband the military. This results in insurgency, right? Then you got an urban war, a lot of people dying, a lot of collateral damage. You have a power vacuum. You have sectarian terrorism on each other. You have both of these groups fighting against us. You sanction support the Shia militia. They use extreme methods, right? Torture, murder. And you're going to say, oh, sure, torture. Man, we use torture. We conduct widespread humiliation and torture. All right, and what I want to do now is read the Bush policy on torture. This is the Bush legal statement, the Bush administration legal statement on humiliation and torture. So on page number 1, they outline what humiliation is and what torture is, and what it isn't, right? Page number 2, they say how everyone gets off. No one gets convicted of torture, if conducted. All right, so first thing is, quote, we further conclude that certain acts may be cruel, inhuman, or degrading, but still not produce pain and suffering of the requisite intensity to fall within section 2340A's prescription against torture. All right, so okay, I agree with that. Right, it's not necessarily torture, but it's inhumane and degrading. And let's take a look at some of the stuff that's done. Now, the first thing you got to ask is humiliating a person a good way of getting intelligence? Is that a good way of getting them to like talk and reveal things, right? Or is that going to get them to shut up and be determined not to tell you jack? All right, so here's some examples of degradation and humiliation. I'll show you some pictures quickly. All right, so these guys are naked all the time. They're always naked, right? They're fully naked, forced to masturbate in front of everyone, including women guards, right? Now, man, that's got to be embarrassing, all right? That's got to be humiliating. That's got to piss you off. Fully naked, men forced to pile on each other, Fully naked, forced to squeeze the penis between her legs to look like a woman. Fully naked, chained to a leash like a dog on all fours, led around by a woman. Rope tied on penises, cutting off circulation. Men tied down a row, and then the first guy pushed down, pulling down each other by their penises. Naked Muslim men being subjected to female caresses. They don't like that. No bathroom breaks, right? Detainees were forced to defecate and urinate naked where they were, right? All this water down there, that could be urine. I don't know. They weren't allowed to move. You're stuck there, right? Or they had to defecate in their orange jumpsuits, right? No bathroom breaks. You're staying where you're at all day long. Now, is humiliation effective? Right? Like, oh, you humiliated me. Now I'll tell you everything you want to know. Right? Or does it make more terrorists? Does it inflame insurgents? Does it boost morale? Does it create ISIS? Right? Now, torture has been proven to be ineffective at obtaining actionable intelligence. Torture has been proven effective at creating hate and radical extremism. Right? Torture has been proven effective at creating false information. People tell you anything to stop the torture. So this is torture I'm talking about, jumping ahead a little bit here. Now the rationalization, people rationalize this easy, right? Oh, they're trying to kill us, right? Man, we go in their country, try to kill them, right? Or running the show. They're going to say, well, they're terrorists. Well, were they all terrorists, right? Or were they insurgents, right? Fighting us because we go and invade their country. And many of them were innocent. And then you have problems with it, like the Phoenix Project effect, where many innocents are falsely accused, right? And I say here, this goes back to the ancient times, to the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Because what did the Jews do? The Jews did the very same thing. They got the Romans to kill Jesus. Why? Because they were too cowardly to do it themselves. Because they knew there would be backlash by Jesus' followers. They feared him. So they got the Romans to kill Jesus. They manipulated the Romans, if you know the whole story there. All right, so naked, chained up, you're in a position all day long. This guy was told that if he got off this box, he'd be electrocuted. Women have a guy on a leash, fully naked. Men forced to pile upon each other. Muslim men, right? And then again piling upon each other, sitting on each other, right? Attack dogs, right? Punching them, beating them up, forced to pile upon each other, right? Got some guy's butt on your shoulder here. And you can see how they're loving this. They're having fun. And I present the principle here of aggressive humor, the power of humor, how it is powerful in getting people to do things they wouldn't otherwise do. They can laugh at it. They can make it a practical joke. People can do some serious harm to other people if they can laugh at it. All right, having to masturbate in front of women. This guy's been chained up here a long time, and he's probably pretty worn out. This guy has an underwear over his head. He's chained to this in a very uncomfortable position. And these guys are left there a long time. All right, so that's humiliation. That's not torture. All this is humiliation, right? Now, are you going to get people to talk by humiliating them, right? Or are you going to radicalize them, piss them off? All right, so let's take a look at the Bush policy on torture. All right, so this is written by a clever lawyer. It's written by this guy here, this fat dude. I look at this guy, I just want to punch his face. He just makes me sick. I think his name is Wu. What's his name? John Wu. Or Yu. John Yu. Right. He looks like he eats way too much rice. Okay. they say physical pain amounting to torture must be equivalent in intensity to the pain accompanying serious physical injuries such as organ failure, impairment of bodily function, or even death. And this is a joke. This is craziness. This is making non-torture anything in all extreme other than death. All right. It's extending the limits of enhanced interrogation to the utmost limit. All right. So what it's saying is this. The idea is this. There is no pain meter, right? There's no meter you can hook up to a person, like an EKG, and then it's got a meter. It says, okay, this is mild pain. This is pain accompanying organ failure. This is pain, right, for physiological shutdown of your body. This is pain of death, right? No, there's no meter there, right? So the only way you're going to know that there's pain that accompanies that is if they die, or if their organs fail, right? And what that means is nothing is torture unless their organs fail or they die. The organs fail and then they die. They have impairment of bodily function and then they die, right? You have organ failure of your heart, you're dead. Organ failure of your liver, you're not living too long, right? Unless you get a transplant. Organ failure of your kidneys, whatever, you're having problems. You may not die for a while with kidneys, but you're going to have some serious problems. Okay. All right, so nothing is torture unless they die. Right, that's the Bush policy here. And the thing about it was, a lot of people did die, right? Up to, when did it start? Like 2000? I don't know. I don't know when it started, but up to 2006. By 2006, 105 had died. 37 of which were classified by the Pentagon as being homicides. All right. Now I'm willing to bet it's probably closer to 105, right? Because people just don't die for no reason, right? Unless they're like really old. Then he said, okay, he died because he's old. All right. So let's take a look at some of the torture methods here. All right. This is actually a torture method. It doesn't look that bad, right? But this can create, severe psychosis. Maybe not super severe because you do have some sensory input, but the idea behind this is you want to take away sensory input, right? Make him immobile, make him not move, and you start going crazy. You can't see anything, can't hear anything, can't smell anything. You got eyes covered, ears covered, a mask over your face. You have your hands in mittens so you can't really feel too well. You can't taste anything. The only thing is, maybe you got a little sensation here and there. Maybe there's a little wind blowing on you, right? But you can't move. Day in, day out, you start going crazy. You need to have sensory input. So this is called, I'll get to it in a second here. Man, my brain is not working. So this is your life, all day, every day, on your knees, head down, no sight, no sound, no touch, no taste, right? No scent. Eyes covered, ears covered, mouth and nose covered with a mask, hands covered with gloves, right? You're shackled. All right, I show, just being stranded on an island without social input, you go crazy. Now this is total sensory deprivation. All right, so let's go through some torture methods here. All right. So a common torture method was beatings. You can just punch them, or they called it walling, where they're slammed against the wall, or kneeing, where they're kneed in the thighs. Right? Now you may think, well, this isn't that bad, right? Well, people have died from this. In fact, I know one case where a guy died because his thighs were so pulverized from kneeing that he had internal bleeding, and then he went into shock, and then he died. Right? All right. Now, I know Americans are going to say, well, they deserve it because they're terrorists. Well, most of these guys were insurgents, right? Did they blow some stuff up? Well, that's what military do. That's what you do with it, These guys are fighting because we invaded the country. And a lot of these guys, like I said, were innocent. But I know Americans are going to say, it's good to torture them because, they deserved it because they're terrorists. Okay, sleep deprivation. So now I think sleep deprivation is like the harshest of them all. Sleep and sensory deprivation, more than waterboarding, which can last, I don't know, like 20 minutes or something like that. Sleep deprivation is like constant, forever, right? Your whole life, as far as you know, you're going to go through this. Now, the limit was a maximum of 180 hours of continuous sleep deprivation. That's 7.5 days. Then you got to give them a little sleep. Then back at it, another 7.5 days. Now, this shows the power of sleep deprivation. During the 1930s, famous or infamous Soviet show trials, sleep deprivation alone was all that was needed to get millions of people to confess to everything they're accused of, right? And then be led to the gallows like numb sheep. They were just like blank stares, you know, speaking in a monotone, like memorized thing, like I'm guilty of this and this and this and this, and then you go send them in, right? They're so broken down. They're psychologically devastated. However, there was no marks on their body, right? Internally, however, their minds and their bodies were devastated by prolonged sleep deprivation. Now, a lot of people think, well, I've gone a day without sleep, right? You get a little tired. No, this is bad, right? This is long, prolonged, and you start breaking down. You need sleep for your body to heal, right? Without sleep, your body starts pumping out crisis hormones, right? Adrenergic hormones, adrenaline, and cortisol. What do? They're both catabolic. They break down your body. You start breaking down. You literally start falling apart. Your organs start, it's more than just, I'll go through like the physiology once well, let me just go back to here. However, internally, their bodies and minds were devastated by prolonged deprivation of sleep. Forced prolonged sleep deprivation can cause intense pain and anguish, even the desire to be dead. I know firsthand. For 2 years, I was subjected to toxic mold, 24/7, little sleep, right? Body breaking down bad, pain, right? Constant organ pain. You're literally decomposing while alive. And I didn't know what was going on at the time. I didn't know it was toxic mold, but I was just breaking down more and more, and no end in sight, right? I got to the point where I'm barely walking. I'm crawling up the stairs on my knees. I can't use my car because when I press the clutch, my leg rips up. It's so torn up and broken down that I had to wear boots, these brace boots, both legs, because just walking would tear my muscles up. And then I had to use crutches at the same time, but my hands got so weak, my forearms got so weak that I can barely use the crutches. And it just got worse and worse. And then I got to the point where, man, I see no end in sight. I'm just getting worse. Screw it. I'm not going to live like this. So I tried to commit suicide 3 times. Right, so sleep deprivation is not a simple loss of sleep. Prolonged sleep deprivation can induce severe psychosis, right? It produces extreme stress and massive release of adrenaline and cortisol. Now, one of the ways that these cause damage is through too much adrenaline, for example. It can cause, let's say, heart damage. It's cardiotoxic. But too much adrenaline can cause activation of alpha receptors. There's five types of adrenergic receptors: alpha 1, alpha 2, beta 1, beta 2, beta 3. Alpha 1 and alpha 2 are both vasoconstrictors. So when you start pumping out adrenaline, it cuts off blood supply to those areas. Right? That's like from the elbows down to the hands. It's like knees down, and those areas start breaking down and tearing. Your upper legs start getting damaged too, eventually. And your intestines, all your internal organs, the blood supply is cut off there. So you have constant organ pain, all right? And I also had inflammatory colitis because my intestines were not getting enough blood, and so they're pretty much like suffocating and not doing too well. And cortisol itself has many bad effects. Cortisol and adrenaline work symbiotically in like a positive feedback thing. Adrenaline causes the release of cortisol. Cortisol causes the increased synthesis of adrenaline and increased release of adrenaline, right? Cortisol is a stress hormone that has many bad effects like immune system suppression. They're both catabolic, breaking down your body. There's many bad effects of cortisol. I'm not going to get into all of them, right? But it breaks you down. Prolonged exposure to this. The body doesn't repair without sleep. You begin to break down and decay, causing organ problems, leading to debilitating diseases, right? You don't heal from beatings, right? And in my case, I was exposed to toxic mold, which is, it didn't just only cause massive release of adrenaline and cortisol, but it also itself was a decomposer. Toxic mold releases what are called superoxidizing molecules that break down any molecule in your body. All right, they're meant to just break things down. You know the old biological triangle. You have producers, you have consumers, and you have decomposers, right? Right. Decomposers are to break things down to release the nutrients, right? Well, mold is a decomposer. It breaks you down, decomposes you as you're living. So worst of all, sleep deprivation. Sleep deprivation can induce severe psychosis, right? So stress positions. This is a typical method used in torture. You see these guys chained up all the time, right? Well, you're there for long periods of time, right? Shackled to the ceiling is actually a method of sleep deprivation. So if you start dozing off, you collapse, and then the bracelets, the handcuffs cut into your hands, and it hurts, and it wakes you up, and it keeps. That's how you keep people awake. Shackled in a constricted, uncomfortable position. So how would you like to spend your day in a box? It's just big enough for you to be in a fetal position. You're curled up, crammed into a tight box. You got some air holes so you can breathe, but you can't see anything really, right? You can't move, right? I mean, you start going crazy in there. I know myself, I got to be out, or otherwise I just go nuts. I spent a week in a submarine, and I was like bouncing off the walls. And that's a submarine where there's, a good amount of room. And I just had to get out and be outside. I can't imagine being locked in a box like that for a long period of time. All right. So is this all effective at getting intelligence? No. Is it effective at creating crazy, pissed off insurgents? Yeah. Prolonged exposure to extreme cold or heat. You're fully naked, then you're exposed to extreme cold, and then you're switched right to extreme heat. Creates a crisis situation in the body. Again, you get massive release of adrenaline and cortisol. All right. Sensory deprivation. So this is what I was talking about. You try to deprive the senses. Now, there are a lot of classic experiments done in sensory deprivation. They're originally done in these water isolation tanks where you have body temperature water that's high salinity. You go in there and you just float. I think you go in there, like a swimming suit or something like that. And it's totally dark. It's totally closed off. There's no sight, no sound, no sensations whatsoever. There's nothing pressing on your body other than buoyant force of the water, right? But you really don't feel much, right? Because it's that water pressure has maximum distribution to keep you afloat, right? And they found that people go crazy. It induces extreme psychosis. You need to have sensory input. If you don't have it, your brain just goes haywire, right? And you go crazy. So that's one of the methods used here. Try to get them stressed by having them go crazy. And oftentimes this is combined with sensory deprivation, except for one, which is loud music. So the idea is this: if you can take away all sensation, right, that accentuates the one thing you're exposed to, so sound. For example, there's a line out of a book called A Man for All Seasons where it says that there's nothing like darkness for sharpening the ear. All right, like in a quiet, still, dark night in your bedroom, you can hear little creaks and so forth. All right. So what they do is they cover your eyes. You put mittens on your hands. You put a mask on your face so you can't smell anything. You can't taste anything. And then they slam your ears with super loud metal music. And I have an example of that type of thing. So that's the type of music they play, this metal music. And so you have everything shut off except for your ears, and your ears are hammered by this constantly, all day long. It just drives you crazy. All right, add to this all the humiliation, degradation. Add to this the physical constraint and stress positions, right? I mean, you get pretty tired standing there all day long, and then you have all these attack dogs is another method. Now, waterboarding is the only thing the media talks about. I mean, I think, it's like, oh, it's nothing. It tries to minimize torture, right? Now, waterboarding, they say, it's simulated drowning. It's not really drowning. No, it is really drowning, right? But it's highly reversible drowning. So what happens is you're laid on the board on your back like this, inclined down, so that the water doesn't rush into your lungs, right? What it does is it pulls up in your nasal and your mouth, right? And when you try to breathe, though, you're going to suck the stuff into your lungs. So to the extent that water goes into your lungs, that is drowning, right? However, being on this board, angled down, is highly reversible. That water can be expelled out of the lungs, and there's issues of infection, but I suppose you can put people on antibiotics if they get a lung infection. All right, so a SEER school lead instructor. He's a lead instructor at SEER school. And what SEER school is a survival and escape school for, let's say, pilots who got shot down behind enemy lines, and to create, they want to get them to be familiar with what's going to happen if they're tortured. So they're exposed to waterboarding, right? Because that's a standard method of torture, and so they're not shocked and overwhelmed by it when it's done to them. They know what to expect, and so they expose these guys to waterboarding, right? And he said this. He said that, well, it is drowning, right? Water gets in your lungs mid-chest high, right? There's extreme stress and terror. You can't breathe, right? But it's reversible. I'll take waterboarding any day over sleep deprivation, right? This is going to last 20 minutes, half hour, or something like that, right? You exist your life 24/7, right? For 7.5 days, right? Getting a little sleep, then back at it, right? Breaking down your body. This is causing major destruction, damage to your body, right? From inside. I'd rather take waterboarding than that. I'd rather take beatings than sleep deprivation. All right. Okay, so I want to talk about my torture. Right now, I was tortured. I didn't know it. I thought it was a medical condition, and it lasted 2 years solid, right, until I realized what's going on. And this is kind of what happened. So I'll just follow what I say here. I was tortured for 2 solid years, 24/7, with CIA toxic mold. Various strains with different effects. I'll talk about the different types down here. There's 4 basic types. I can tell by when I'm exposed to a different type, right? Now, mold is a decomposer that breaks things down by releasing superoxidizing molecules that break down any molecule in your body. So here's the scenario I said before. You have producers, which absorb light, plants, whatever, right, algae. You have consumers that eat that as a form of energy, right, and they use that to build their bodies, right? We're consumers, right? And then you have decomposers. So after animals die, to recycle all the nutrients, right, you have decomposers break you down. Well, what if you have a decomposer breaking you down while you're alive, right? That just messes you up. Okay. Decomposing, but also work through adrenaline and cortisol. So, like I said, when you're exposed to these to toxic mold, part of your body's immune response is to jack out adrenaline and cortisol, right? Your body's jacking this out. Now, what happens is, like I said, adrenaline, when it comes in contact with, let's say, beta-2 receptors, well, that's a vasodilator. That'll loosen things up. So some blood vessels, like in your heart, your lungs, right, that you need blood in emergency, that has beta-2 receptors. But in your extremities and your organs, which are not needed in a fight-or-flight situation, right, you have alpha-1 and alpha-2 receptors. So it wants to shunt blood towards most needed in an emergency. It takes it away for it's less needed. And in those areas, if you're exposed to this 24/7, pumping out adrenaline 24/7, you're not getting blood, and those areas start breaking down, right? That's why my legs, my lower leg tendons and muscles were basically just falling apart, right? It didn't take too much, stress on it to tear. The pressure of pushing a clutch in would tear my legs, lower legs apart, right? That's crazy. It's like it's just like it's been cooked. It's like pulled pork that's been cooked for 12 hours. It falls apart. And it was a nightmare, right? I'm just breaking down. You're in constant pain. Your skin is all messed up. Your hair is falling out. Your eyes are all burning, right? Your organs are all in pain. You can't sleep. Right? You can't imagine what a nightmare it was. And what's worse is there's no end to this. Right? You don't see an end in sight. It's just getting worse and worse. You're breaking down more and more. And that's a nightmare. Not knowing if it's going to stop. And then you get to the point where you think, well, man, this is not going to stop. And you realize it's not going to stop. You're just going to get worse. And that's when I said, well, there's no way I'm living like this. There's no way I'm going out like this. So that's when I tried to commit suicide 3 times. Right. So you're progressively decaying. It was a non-stop living nightmare, right? Decaying away, breaking down, constant organ pain, until I attempted suicide 3 times. Right? Wasn't too effective, though. I thought I would be, right? The first time I tried to commit suicide is I thought I had a really big carving knife. I don't think I have it anymore. It's this big monster, large carving knife, right? And I sharpened it like crazy. I just scraping it with that sharpening rod, right? And I had my T-shirt on. I started shoving the blade into my belly, thinking I could do this right. I'm thinking, my ancestors. I'm Japanese, right? Oh, they all samurai just cut their guts open. They can do it. I can do this stuff. And I just couldn't get myself to do it, right? I would push hard just before it was breaking through the skin, and they're like, I can't do this. I'll try something else, and then I thought, well, I'll suffocate myself with carbon monoxide. So I went to Home Depot and I bought like a big flexible hose, right? It was wide enough to go over my exhaust pipe, and then I duct taped that one end to my exhaust pipe, and I took the other end and shoved it in a window, had it all rolled up, and ran my car, and I laid in there and waited to die from asphyxiation from carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide actually forms a covalent bond with hemoglobin, so it just knocks out your oxygen carrying capacity, and you die that way, right? However, that didn't happen, and I'm waiting there for like 2 hours in my car. I'm thinking, what the hell, right? Why am I not dying? And I just started getting sick, and I started feeling sick because I was getting acidotic. I was getting too much CO2. Right? And the reason why there wasn't enough carbon monoxide is because I realized, well, the catalytic converter is working too well. It's converting all the carbon monoxide, which would bond with your hemoglobin, and it's converting it to CO2, which only forms carbonic acid in your blood, making you acidotic, making me feel sick, but I'm not dying. Right? So that was my second try. That didn't work. And my third try came close, where I took every damn pill I had, and I had all sorts of vasodilators, sedative hypnotics, right? And had an antidepressant, an old-fashioned tricyclic, which knocks you out. It's an anticholinergic. So I knew it would knock me out. It would also like drastically lower my blood pressure. I had all these alpha receptor blockers, which would open up the the arteries where there's alpha receptors, which helped me recover for a while there. It worked for a little while. And then I would pass out and die, right? It was like 4 or 5 degrees out, maybe 6 degrees outside, middle of winter in Chicago area, up near Wisconsin, so it's really cold. And I soaked myself with water, took all these pills, went outside soaking wet, and just lay out there, sat outside to pass out and die, right? But someone found me. It's a strange thing where the workers normally came in around 9 o'clock. This guy came in like 4:30 in the morning, real early, because I went out there like 4 in the morning, 3:30, 4 in the morning, expected to be dead, right? and then the workers would find me, and I was kind of like paranoid about foxes eating me. There's foxes up in that area, and I don't want a fox to munch on me. So I went out with enough time to die, but not enough time for foxes to find me and eat me. But this guy shows up at 4:30. He's like, he's shaking me. Like I woke up, right? He said, "Wake up, right?" And that's the last thing I remember. The next thing I remember is 3 days later in the hospital, and I have all these tubes, fluid going in me, and then I had a catheter, fluid going out. So they're constantly pumping, they're flushing me to get the stuff out of my system. So I had extreme hypothermia and had all those drugs in me. But so I lived. I failed at suicide. But then I went to my brother's after that. He was all panicked, so I stayed with him for a few months, and I started getting better. And then I went back to my place, and I recognized the something following here, right? When you're there for a long time, you don't notice it, right? And what these guys did, how they got me to not think it's mold is, they whacked me first time bad after I came back with a super damaging. I call it the super homicidal toxic mold, which is totally non-allergenic. You don't notice it, right? You're not sneezing. It's not causing your eyes to irritate, but it breaks you down the worst. This is the worst. Like I said, there's different types of the toxic mold they would expose me to, right? This was the worst, and you don't notice it really. And it's not very noticeable. And I did notice it when I came back. There's something foul in the air, so I started staying away as much as possible. I knew that something was in the air then. Anyways, I have all sorts of tests to prove it, mold tests, but they play with these tests too. I'm not going to explain how. The CIA is masters at. They're master liars. They're masters at destroying evidence. They're masters at concealing evidence. They're masters at preventing evidence. They're masters at cleaning things up, right? They leave no trace. They're called spooks, all right? And they do everything with maximum deniability. You can't prove jack in court, right? And they're going to have anyone on their side. You're not going to. They're going to network to the police and whatever, right? There's no touching these guys. They're above the law. Yeah, I'd broken down so badly I couldn't press the clutch of my car without my lower leg muscles tearing. Right, they would just tear apart. So I had to buy a brand new car with an automatic transmission, and actually, that's another game they played. They played a get you get in game, right? So my leg was all messed up, right? My left leg was worse. So I had to use my right leg on my clutch, and I had to use a stick on the gas pedal. Right, and then what happened is my brakes went out on my my pickup truck with the clutch. Right, so I took it to a brake shop, and they played me. They played me so many times before, but I was just so out of it, so desperate just to get it fixed. They played me. I got there in the morning, and they made me wait until the end of the day, and then they said that, well, we're gonna have to keep your car overnight. We'll drive you home. Well, who does that? I fell for this. But I was so crazy out of my mind, sick, right, and desperate that I said, okay, I'll do it, right. So instead of saying, well, go home, come back tomorrow, we'll schedule the morning, they say, leave the car overnight, right. What a sucker I was. I was so out of my mind. So I left my car overnight there, and they drove me home. I lived about over 10 miles away. They drove me all the way home. Next day they said, oh, your car's done, right. We'll pick you up. So they drove over there. They picked me up. And I got back, started my car, drove home. Next day, it was totally dead, right? Shorted out. And they did this to me before. They shorted out my car before. Twice they've done this. So this is the third time they screwed with it, so I can't start it in this manner. And then my brother came a little later in the year. I bought a new car. I was like, man, I need to see doctors, right? So I'm desperate to try to get fixed and try to find out what's going wrong with me. And so I'm seeing doctors, and I need a car. So I bought a brand new car with automatic transmission. And I would never buy a used car because I don't know. I was always worried about it being tampered with, Anyway, so I had to buy a new car, and yeah, my brother came. That's a few months later. The family was on a trip coming through the Chicago area, and they stopped in. And I asked my brother, "Hey, can you check out? I think I got a short in my car. Can you check it out?" And he went under my car, and he came out in like less than a minute, right? About a minute. He was only there for a short time. And he says this to me. He says, "Well, someone's trying to make more money." I'm like, what are you talking about? There's an intentional short there, right? Go look for yourself. And it's crazy, right? To get this, first of all, the starter motor is a heavy drawer of amperage, a lot of current because it's only 12-volt battery for one thing, right? And it takes a lot of power to turn that engine. That means, you need to have both with low voltage, you need to have high volume of current, which means it's going to have a lot of resistance, a lot of heat. You need a thick wire to take that, or it's going to melt through, right? So the wire that leads into there is thick as a coat hanger, as stiff as a coat hanger. It's bent in an S shape. All the insulation is scraped off on the point of the S shape, and it's bent to touch the starter motor. That does not happen, right? First of all, the insulation doesn't wear off right there. Second, or cut off right there. And second, that wire doesn't bend. It's a piece of metal, like stiff metal, right? Like a coat hanger. It doesn't bend on its own. And so they got me there, and then this is while I'm all being tortured and being broken down. And all right, so and why do they do this? To get their ad hominem. If I say something about it, you're crazy. They'll pass. He's crazy. He's a false accuser, and all the masses will fall for it. And then they won't believe anything I say. It's just past in social reality. That one thing waved in social reality is the only thing that dominates their brain, right? Facts that I've taught, all the thousands of facts, gone. What dominates is the one thing being waved in front of their face. That always works. And that's why social reality, that's one of the reasons why social reality is so powerful. One of the many reasons. I'm not going to get into that again. I just taught that. And it was all getting worse, right? I had to go up the stairs on my knees. I couldn't walk up the stairs because just walking up the stairs would tear up my lower leg muscles and tendons. So I would go up on my knees, right? It was all getting worse without end. I saw no end in sight. It was just getting worse and worse. So I tried to commit suicide 3 times. But do you think the CIA stopped after that? Hell no. These guys are some fun guys, right? They don't care, right? All right. Lab-grown CIA toxic mold, right? They're bioterrorists. They're talking about finding WMD. They're terrorists. They're bioterrorists. Attacking a U.S. citizen in the United States who's done no wrong. Too funny. All right. So 24/7. Okay. So finally I realized that it's toxic mold. I can't tell you how crazy what they do to conceal things. But anyways, so I know it's toxic mold, right? And then what I'm doing is I'm desperately trying to stay out of my place. I'm only going to my place to sleep minimal time, right? I have every window open. Middle of winter, it could be like below zero. I have fans blowing constantly, right? Just trying to pump out the toxic mold. It's so thick, and there's no mold anywhere. I had 3 mold inspectors come, and they said there's no mold anywhere. There's no source of water anywhere. You need to have continuous leaking water, right, for that mold to grow. Right? You have no water. You have no mold anywhere, and yet my place is like saturated with toxic mold spores. Right? I mean, this is just lab-grown CIA stuff. Now, what they started doing is, and this happened like when I was in Chicago bad, 24/7, no matter where I go, right? And I would buy these CTA month passes, and with that you could take unlimited trains and buses, not just in this city, but in all the surrounding suburban area throughout, a big chunk of Illinois, all around Chicago, any suburb around there. It networks to the pass. So I would go all around the Chicago and Chicago area trying to go to new places, little restaurants, McDonald's, whatever, right? Just to get a little fresh air. And within 30 minutes to 90 minutes. Usually it's right around 30 minutes, right? The longest is ever is like 90 minutes. Um, they would have installed in the ventilation duct right above me. They're so damn good. They get inside, and they get into the system. I don't know how they do it, whether it's some sort of I don't know, some vehicle thing that hauls, but they get into the duct right above you, the ventilation duct right above you, and they start pumping out toxic mold. Then you got to leave, right? So they hunt you down, they chase you all around, right? Constantly, and multiple, right? Here's an example. One example is I went to Chicago State University's library. It's a big library. It's like 4 or 5 stories. I think it's 4 stories, all right. And I'd go to a spot in the library. Within a half hour, they'd whack me, right? I moved to another spot in the library, whack me, right? Half hour. It was a half hour every time. It takes them about a half hour to get this. So they're right on top of me. They're right behind me, following me 24/7, installing these things, right? And I went to every damn floor. I was like, dispersed here and there throughout the library, every damn floor. Then I had to leave, right? They whacked every point. They have unlimited resources. They're U.S. government, right? They have discretionary funds. No one knows what they're spending it on. Congressional oversight. Yeah, right. Yeah, that's going to stop them. All right. Laws. that's going to stop the CIA. All right. They're way above all this stuff. Okay. So they still whack me today, but not nearly as much. Like for example, they haven't whacked me at all today, and right. They really backed off. In Chicago, they whacked me 24/7 everywhere I went. They hunted me down everywhere, no rest. Right. My place was constantly whacked. Yeah, everywhere I went. The safest places were actually university cafeterias, because students get on their phones and they just bitch and complain. And it was widely known that this happened, right? But you know what? Does anyone remember a specific complaint? No one remembers jack. So again, it's like, he's crazy. No one remembers anything. So what dominates is social reality? And that's always the case. All right, so the only limitation, the CIA's only limitation, is fear of being caught publicly, right? But they know that people are not gonna remember anyway, so it's gonna fade, right? Just like when I teach something, they know, we'll attack it. Well, maybe we won't attack it. Well, it'll fade. No one's gonna remember anyways. And that's what happens. Powerly, no one's gonna remember. They'll fade. Shift focus. Right? Discredit him this way. Make a mocking joke. Say he's blah blah blah. He doesn't know anything. Say all my stuff on profit from war is all bunk. Right? Now, does anyone remember my whole lecture? No. Right? Does anyone really follow this? No. So you get everyone saying it's bunk, and that's what everyone believes. Dominates social reality. How many times have I taught social reality? Thousands and thousands of times. Yet, does anyone learn? No. They keep falling for it. All right, so let's see. Yeah, they're spooks. But toxic mold has maximum deniability, right? They're spooks. They destroy evidence. I can teach you so many stories of how good they are at destroying evidence, right? And they manufacture false evidence. They're so good at it. They have it down to an art and science, right? And what is that? All of that is lies, right? Manufacturing evidence, destroying evidence. Just the stuff of lies. Now, the reason why toxic mold has maximum deniability is there is no blood culture. There's no medical blood culture for mold, right? Toxic mold is everywhere, so they can say, well, it's just in the air. It's always in the air, right? Toxic mold has like a pretty steady state replication rate. It's not like a virus or bacteria, which can have an exponential replication rate and get out of control. Toxic mold is pretty slow and steady, right? And your body eliminates it. So your body's going to normally overwhelm it and get rid of it, right? Keep you clear of it. Now, it only damages you if you're constantly exposed to it, right? And they can control the amount of damage by controlling the duration and the amount you're being exposed to, right? And so they have very fine control of the amount of damage they can cause your body. All right. And there's different types of mold. There's 4 main categories of mold. There's one that's non-allergenic, which doesn't cause much allergic reaction. So oftentimes you don't even know you're being exposed to this until like my heart starts racing, right? And and then my forearms start going numb, or my feet start going numb, right? And this is the worst. This is the one that causes the most damage, right? Then there's one that is highly allergenic. It's super allergenic, but it's mild. It has very little effect. It doesn't damage you at all, but you know you're exposed to it. You're sneezing, your eyes are watering, right? You're coughing, right? But it doesn't do a lot of damage to you. Now they use this when they want to get an ad hominem attack. When they want me to say something so they can attack it and say I'm crazy or something like that. They whack me with this one, right? Because I know it right away. And if I say something, they record that, pass that everywhere, and say I'm crazy. Use that to attack my credibility. Now there's one that causes liver seizing. This one, it just whacks your liver. Your liver, you feel like your liver is a fist that's clenched. If it just cramps up, like a muscle that's cramped, like your calf muscle cramped. Your liver feels like that. And then within just like 2-3 minutes, your stomach starts bloating, right? Because there's arteries that feed your intestines. I think the mesenteric arteries, feed your intestines, and then all the stuff that is absorbed out of your intestines goes into the hepatic portal system, right? A series of veins, right, that collect into larger one, and it dumps into one large vein going into the liver, all right? And anyways, if the liver's backed up, all that stuff, all that blood has nowhere to go, right? So it backs up, and the pressure builds up in the blood vessels because it can't go anywhere. Right? So then what happens is blood vessels are not like PVC, which are solid. Blood vessels are basically like, cells knit together with gaps in between. So the fluid, the water leaks out, and it goes into your pleural cavity, and then you get ascites. You get a big bloated belly. My belly would bloat within like 2 minutes. My belly's bloated, right? I'm whacked by this, boom, my belly just explodes. It just expands like a balloon being blown up, right? And then when I leave that area, it goes down within like a minute. If I leave my place, if I get whacked in my place with that, if I walk out, within a minute, it goes back down to normal. All right? Go back in, it gets bloated again. Right? It's not psychosomatic. I can't control my liver. I can't make my belly get bloated. Then there's one that causes headaches. Right? There's one that causes severe headaches. Again, same thing. Right? If I get out of there, within a minute, by the time I walk down to the elevators down the hall, my head is cleared. The headache is gone. Go back in, my head is throbbing, killing me. Right? So this toxic mold somehow just targets your brain, right? Gives you a bad headache. One targets your liver, causes your liver seize. One is super toxic and breaks you down bad, right? And like I said, walk out of my place. By the time I get down to the elevator, gone, cleared, right? That's less than a minute. So I said their torture backfired on me because it didn't get me to stop, right? Like I said, I used to kind of worship my body. I used to be very athletic and very strong and coordinated, and it was like a false sense of pride, right? It's kind of lame, but I was like pretty proud of it, right? And once that was gone, once my body was broken down to nothing, right? Like it's like, what do you got to lose? What do I care, right? You're going to have to kill me, right? I'm not stopping. So it backfires on them. And it backfires on a lot of people, right? It's like bombing. Bombing in London, Did they get the British people to stop? No. It just stiffened their resolve. All right, after today's struggling body, what did I have to lose, right? Maybe brutal methods pacify some people, all this like Operation Condor stuff. Maybe it scares some people into passivity, but other people, they get more determined. They get more pissed off, right? And some people get radicalized. They're gonna they're stopping at nothing. Um, so what's the CIA purpose in this? Well, the big purpose is ad hominem attacks, right? It's get you again games. They get me if I say something, right? And of course, the masses aren't exposed to this, so they think it's crazy, right? And they'll pass it. If I say something, they record that, pass it everywhere, and then they create a big wave, social reality. And because of that wave, everyone believes it. He's crazy. You don't believe him. He's a nutso, right? It works. Works every damn time. Degrade my abilities. They do it. They do it for this reason. Sometimes they want to just mess me up so I can't think. They mess my body up so I can't ski. If I ski too well, they don't like it. Right? Boom, they whack me. I'm out for the season. Right? And then they just moderate it. Right? This year they did something different. It's like last year, the first year I started skiing. I haven't skied in 11 years. And started getting a little bit back. Right? Boom, they whack me. They take me out for the whole damn season. They whack me so hard I'm barely walking. All right? This year they played a game. It was like a cat and mouse game where they would whack me just to mess me up, right? I can't really ski too well, right? So I had trouble skiing this year. And then they let it off a little bit, like a week. They let off, right? I skied a little bit better, and then after that they whacked me again. So I never was able to really ski that well. So yes, I have no doubt these guys do torture. There's no doubt, right? All this stuff, yeah, they do it, right? Bush policy, yeah, they use it. Nothing's torture until you die. Till your organs fail and you die. That's crazy. That's pretty funny. And what is that doing? Is that getting information, or is that pissing people off? Is that making more terrorists? Is that making ISIS? That's just great. All right, so yeah, a bunch of fun guys. Not in the USA. No, not Uncle Sam. USA, USA. Yeah, right. Okay, so that's it for this lesson. What do we talk about? We talk about groups. We talk about groups that are problems, right? And this is what I'm really getting to. I think the most important thing about these neocons now is the new Cold War we're leading to. New Cold War is going to be a big moneymaker. All right, we're going to talk about this in next lesson, maybe tomorrow, maybe the day after. I'll try to get this ready. So that's the next thing coming up. So do the neocons do some dirty stuff? Do they start a lot of wars? Yeah. Can I teach you all that again? No. Right? Do they do a lot of torture? Yeah. Do they create a lot of conflict and chaos? Yeah. Right? Throughout the Middle East, throughout many decades, but even in this one war here, the Iraq invasion war, right? They messed it all up, right? I can't see a military man creating a policy like this, right? Some intelligent military guy would never create some crazy Bush policy that's like designed to create conflict and chaos. But conflict and chaos is a moneymaker. Okay, that's it for this lesson.